Rabbi. Good morning,
Yes, good
Rabbi.
morning. Oh, good afternoon, everyone.
Right.
Mazel tov on your
good.
installation.
I'm sorry.
Mazel tov on your installation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
lovely. Beautifully done. Beautiful
you.
service. Beautiful.
Thank you. It was actually more than I could have asked for. It was really lovely. And I was so honored by the words that everybody shared. I just hope I can live up to them.
You already do. You already do.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like between Rabbi Kroloff and Rabbi Miller and my friend Rabbi Geringer, I have a tall order to live up to now.
Victor, is she a rabbi in Massachusetts?
No, she has a home on the Cape. Her son and daughter-in-law run a restaurant on the Cape. Well, they've always had a house on the Cape for many years, but Kim had been for a while. She was a rabbi at in Warren at I forgot the congregation.
Har Shalom.
Har Shalom. She was one of the rabbis at Har Shalom. And then, well, she and I started in school together. So we spent 5 years together in school. And then we worked together at the Union for Reform Judaism. And then our, families got to know each other, and I officiated at her son's wedding. So, we just, and we have mutual friends in common. So that's how we got to know each other.
Nice.
I hope you all enjoyed her sermon. I think she's wonderful.
She was fabulous. She was excellent.
Yeah. More than it being about me, I really wanted people to have the opportunity to hear her because I think she's so great. In fact, the year we were ordained, they give out all these awards to students, and she won the award for the best sermon of the year.
No surprise.
And you could see why.
Right. Indeed.
Right.
Indeed. Nice.
So, yeah. So I hear there's a little bit of snow outside. I don't know. I'm in a rabbinic bat cave. I have no windows.
Just a little bit.
That's funny.
It stopped already.
No, it didn't stop here, but it's
it did here.
It's only sticking to roofs. It's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
But maybe we would have a white Hanukkah. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's snowing up here in Warren.
But you're up in the mountains there.
Oh, you're in Warren. Oh.
Yeah, but it's snowing on Fairfield Circle and Westfield too. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. So good to see everybody today. A little chilly, so it's nice to be inside. So welcome to the second session of The Torah Says What? And today I thought we would take a look at one particular text, the rape of Dinah. And we can look at this and see it as troubling on a number of different levels. There's a lot going on. It's not only the rape that is a troubling part of the story. There's a part of the story that involves revenge, and that's also troubling. So we kind of want to look at it as in the multitude of that, and we're going to look at it. I want us to take a look at the story through a variety of different lenses to see how people have interpreted this passage from a wide range of approaches, both contemporary, scholarly, rabbinic, whatever, and see how people make sense of it. And the first thing is, so let's actually take a little bit of a look at this text. Hold on, let's see if I can show my screen. Okay. Let's see where. This is what. Hold on, let me just see. Where'd that go? Hold on one second.
case there's
I
Hebrew.
want to see if I have the
Hebrew.
text
Get the
up
Bible.
somewhere. Hold on.
Oh, he puts it up.
Oh,
I'll get it.
Okay.
I hear you, Ron.
There we go. Okay. Okay, so here is, if I can find, so here it is. So we're in the book of Genesis, and I thought we would first just quickly read through the part of this Torah portion that has to deal with the rape of Dinah, and it begins in chapter 34. And it's interesting because first of all, we have to see it in context of even the portion in which it is located. It's sort of a standalone chapter, right? It before that we have the reconciliation of the brothers of Jacob and Esau, and they have their reconciliation, the tearful reunion, the hugging, and then they decide they're going to go on their separate ways. They're not going to travel together, and then boom, we have a totally different story inserted in the text that does not necessarily have any relationship to what we just read or any chronological relationship either. It's sort of a standalone. It's as if someone just dropped it in the Torah and said, okay, here, we're going to put this piece here. So with that, would someone like to begin reading chapter 34, verse 1? One day. Anyone jump in?
One day, Dinah, Leah's daughter, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the locality. And Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the local prince, saw her. He took her and laid her down and raped her. He was then captivated by Jacob's daughter Dinah, and falling in love with the young woman, spoke tenderly to the young woman. So Shechem said to his father Hamor, obtain this girl for me as my wife. Want me to keep going?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. At the time that Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the field with his livestock. So he kept quiet until they came back. Shechem's father Hamor now went to Jacob to speak with him. And meanwhile, Jacob's sons had returned from the field. When they heard, the men were grieved and became extremely angry, for he had committed an outrage against Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter. Such things were not done. Hamor now spoke with them, saying, my son Shechem has set his heart on your daughter. Pray give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us. Give us your daughters, and you yourselves take our daughters. Live among us, and the land will be before you. Settle and trade here and acquire property here. And Shechem said to Dinah's father and brothers, let me but find favor in your sight, and I will give you whatever you ask. Exact from me bridal money and gifts to excess, yet I will pay whatever you demand of me. Only give me the girl to be my wife. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceptively, speaking thus because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, we cannot do this thing, giving our sister to a man who has a foreskin, for this is a shame to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you, if you become like us by having every one of your males circumcised. Then we would give you our daughters and would take your daughters and settle among you and become one people. But if you do not listen to us and consent to be circumcised, we shall take our daughter and leave. Their words seemed good to Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem. And the youth did not delay doing this thing, for he yearned for Jacob's daughter, and he was preeminent in his father's household. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of their city and spoke to their fellow citizens, saying, these people are peaceably disposed towards us. They will settle in the land and trade here. Plainly, the land is open wide on every side before them. We will take to wife their daughters and give our daughters to them. But only on this condition have these people agreed to settle among us and become one people. Every male among us must be circumcised as they are circumcised. Their livestock and their possessions, all their animals will be ours. Let us consent to them that they may settle among us. All who went out of the city gate listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male, every able-bodied man was circumcised. On the third day, when they were in the greatest pain, the two sons of Jacob, Shimon and Levi, or Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword. They went undisturbed into the city and killed every male. And they also killed Hamor and his son Shechem by the sword. Then taking Dinah from Shechem's house, they left. Jacob's other sons went over the slain and plundered the city, whose inhabitants had defiled their sister, taking their sheep, their cattle, and their donkeys, and all that was in the city and in the countryside, and all their wealth, their little ones and their wives, and all that was in the houses, they seized as captives and as spoil. Jacob then said to Simeon and Levi, you have made trouble for me by making me odious to the land's inhabitants, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Since I am few in number, they will gather themselves against me and strike at me, and I and my household will be destroyed. But they said, should he then have been allowed to treat our sister like a whore?
Great. Thank you. Thank you. That was a lot of reading, and I appreciate that.
Oh, it's a story. Wow.
Right. So that is, I think, one of the great, and I don't mean that necessarily in a kind way, but one of the great stories that we find in the Torah.
Right.
It is a completely self-contained story within one chapter. And so we kind of have to figure out, what is that doing there? And we could ask a number of questions. Anyone want to pose any questions about this story?
Yeah, I have a thought question. It's self-contained in one way, but in another way, Jacob has been told by God, you must return to the land of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So now, why are they now telling the people of Shechem that they'll live with them when God has commanded them otherwise? I don't understand that.
Okay, great question. Great. Any other questions that jump out of you, out at you?
Can I,
Is this,
Sarah?
Dara, yeah, I can't see myself, I'm sorry. I hid myself. Are you calling on me?
Yes.
Oh,
You
okay.
raised-
So just a question, what is the punishment in the, I guess, the book of Leviticus or whatever, for the rape of a single woman? Is there a
That-
punishment or?
That's a great question, and we'll get to that. That's the
So just
punishment is
answer it
actually
shortly.
well, we'll get to it today. The punishment is actually in Deuteronomy, not in Leviticus. But I'm so
Okay,
glad
well.
you asked that question. Ronnie, did you have something?
is this the first genocide and a precursor for genocides and destruction of inhabitants we inhabit to come?
Right.
Yeah.
Great question.
All right. My question is, right at the beginning, they said that Dinah went out to visit with the women in the locality. What are they trying to tell us there about Dinah? Why would she be leaving her house to go visit with the women of the locality? There's a message there. I'm just not sure what it is.
Okay, great question.
I have a question. I know that they made a promise, but they did it as a ruse to make the people, their enemies, vulnerable. But what does that say about how good is your word? You gave your word, and now you go against it.
Okay.
And I have another question. Doesn't chamor mean donkey?
Right. Yes.
So the father is an ass.
Right.
Okay.
Eugene,
Yeah, so
looks like you froze. Hopefully you'll unfreeze. Well, Diane.
What does Dina think of all this?
Great. Well, you'll have to ask Anita Diamond. She's the one who she's the person who really put the words into Dina's mouth that the text does not give. So there
Another
are
question.
Yes.
In the text, it looks like that the negotiation where the sons, ask for the circumcision, like Jacob isn't present anymore in that conversation.
Right.
He's like at the beginning, the father Hamor approaches him, and then suddenly he's absent from the story.
Right, which is also very, very interesting. His silence and absence. Eugene, you're back.
lost my connection. I went to another room where I can speak, not bothering somebody here. Today I'm at my daughter's house for grandchildren. My granddaughter has lesson. She's learning remotely. and I went to another room, but there is bad connection. But anyway, I finished my question, but I did not hear any answer. Could you
We
repeat?
didn't hear your question. You froze.
Oh, no, I'm not my answer. It was not question. I finished my comment that that behavior is not good, in my opinion. And I wanted to hear different opinions about that or comment on this, my comment, please.
Okay, great, great. So there are any number of questions that we could ask about this text. It's certainly, there are parts of it that are troubling. There are parts of it that are confusing that we don't have any easy answers for. The question I would ask to start with is, did this even happen? Right? Did this story even happen? Are we reading a story that kind of happened in real time, or is this a reflection? And regardless of whether it happened or not, what's the point of the story? What are we being told? Okay. Obviously, if this story is here, if someone dropped it in this place, they wanted us to take some message away from it. And what might be that message? And it may not be the message that we think. Okay. So, and I'm a little bit more interested in what modern biblical scholars have to say than, for example, what Rashi might have to say. Even though the early biblical commentators had a lot to say, they mainly were looking at what they consider the motives of the people, right? Was Dinah, to blame, as they say, for going out unaccompanied, right? Was this a time and a place where women did not do such things? So was she opening herself up to risk by going out unaccompanied, right? They looked at Jacob and his absence in some ways in the story. And what does that mean? So, but those are all, and while those are all interesting things, I want to see what we learn from looking at this text through a lens of biblical scholarship. That kind of helps us put this all in context.
Because there are technical issues here and I have to go away. Unfortunately, I'm sorry.
Okay. So, first of all, this text has a name. I think I may have mentioned it last week, and it falls into a category that we call texts of terror. Okay, and that is a term that was coined by a Christian feminist theologian named Phyllis Tribble. And it refers to scriptural narratives in which women are the victim. Okay. And we can think of other instances in the Torah that we might place under that heading of text of terror. Anything come to mind? Does anyone have anything?
Are you talking about the victimization of women, or women are used?
Yeah.
I would say when Sarah is described as Abraham's sister rather than his wife.
Right. That's that's one of those texts where we imagine that Sarah is, hauled off to the king's castle or whatever he lived in, unaccompanied, and we don't know what happened to her there, right? So there's that. We might look at the text of Lot's wife, who turns into a pillar of salt. Certainly there's the test of the supposed adulterous woman, the test of the bitter waters, right? Where she has to drink the bitter waters as a test of whether she committed adultery or not. We could look at the entire book of Esther as a text of terror against women. So there are a lot of these places where we see this. And this is certainly one of them. And that's one way of thinking about this. And so we took a look at the story, and we want to ask, what's the story really about? And it's very easy because we're looking at the saga of Jacob to see this through the lens of his family and maybe family dysfunction, right? It's very easy to see this as Jacob being weak or the brothers being vengeful, or even looking at Dinah as being careless or whatever, however we may want to look at it. But there might be some other things, other ways that we could look at the text to help us understand it. And first, we have to see things in context. And one of the recurring themes in the book of Genesis, interestingly enough, and it may not jump out at us, is the sexual depravity of the inhabitants of the land, right? This is actually a theme that takes place in Genesis. So what are some of the examples? Well, you mentioned one, I think, I don't know who mentioned the story of Sarah being, taken off to the king's castle, right? And she's not the only matriarch who that happens to. That happens with Isaac and Rebekah as well. And we also have the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So we do have this ongoing theme, and sometimes it gets a little bit lost, that there is a concern about the sexual mores of the people in the land, and we having to differentiate from them. Jane.
There's also Potiphar's
Mrs. Potiphar.
a daughter that accuses Joseph of rape when he
Right.
did.
Exactly, right. And Mark?
You could argue that Jacob was not the paragon of all goodness, and since he sleeps with everyone who he's offered to sleep with.
Right. And we have the story of Tamar. We have lots of stories of sexual behavior that we see the text as saying that we want to differentiate ourselves from, and certainly all of the prescriptions in Leviticus. So this, we see this throughout the text, and we could look at this from that perspective as well. And interestingly enough, the text does not seem to see Shechem as a rapist. How does the text look at him?
He's a love-struck swain.
Right. The starry-eyed young man who just couldn't help himself. And so, the text does not see him so much as the rapist, but as a lover and a potential husband to Dinah. And the text de-emphasizes the violence of his behavior.
Right.
And so let's think about how some scholars look at this, because what happens is that when we look at the story, it seems like the story is marginalizing the rape, right? Making it not the center focus of the story.
It seems like it's more about that the honor of the men, of the brothers, was insulted. That this has been a crime against our people, not against Dinah, but against, that they've ruined our reputation. They sullied our honor, so we have to pay them back.
That's still the attitude in a lot of the Middle East.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Absolutely, right.
The woman ceases, right immediately after the act, ceases to be important, and it's all about the honor and the ego and the bravado of the men.
Right. So let's look at what some scholars have had to say about this, because interestingly enough, a lot of scholars, based on their research, also marginalize the rape in the story, and take the view that that is not the major focus of the story, and may not even have happened. Okay, so let's take a look. First, I want to introduce you to Gerhard von Rad, who is a scholar of the Hebrew Bible. And so he says that the story didn't even happen. These are not actual events, but a conflict that had taken place in early Israelite tribal history. So he understands that some catastrophe related to territorial dispossession must have happened, okay? And the story remembers the departure of the tribes of Simeon and Levi from the territory around Shechem. And so rape is not the issue. He sees this as tribal dispossession based on his understanding of historical events from the time. And so this story was sort of written later on to explain what happened, to sort of fill in the parts of the story that we don't get. And then there's another biblical scholar, Lynn Bechtel, sees this as ancient Israel's struggle between integration and exclusion of foreign people. And I think this is very interesting because this is a theme that we're going to see developed much later on in the Torah, and it's going to be a central theme. And so here we have one theme, one faction, and that's represented by Dinah and Jacob. And they want to interact with outsiders, right? Not necessarily assimilate, but they want to have relationships with the people around them in the areas in which they live. Now, the other group, which is personified by the brothers, particularly Simeon and Levi, they want separation and group purity, right? They don't want any intermingling. And so this story is a story about that. From her perspective, it's not about rape. And she says that ancient Israelites lived and worked to serve the good of the larger group, right? It's a clan or a large group. And in a group-oriented society, differentiation between us and them is essential, right? And we can see that in any tribal society where the tribes need to differentiate themselves and create clear lines over which one will not cross. And so in this sense, if we look at this as sort of a group-oriented society, marriage is a group affair, right? Love has really nothing to do with it. And so this was a matter of, would one people interact with another people? Would the Israelites, who were basically visitors in the land, interact with the settlers around them? And again, and we're going to see that, right? We're going to see that especially after the Exodus, where many of the laws that we get are laws that prohibit us from interacting with other people, especially the laws of kashrut, right? Most of the laws of kashrut don't necessarily have a rationale that we're given in the Torah to understand. The separation of meat and milk and the abstinence of certain foods. But we look at that as ways of keeping us apart from other people around us, right? The laws meant that we couldn't, yeah, Mark.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt, I'm sorry. But when I'm thinking back when the patriarchs, when they marry, they're strictly told not to marry within the community. They should go back to their family and marry. Right. And that's what Abraham did for Isaac, and that's what happened with Jacob. So there was, even though it wasn't yet in the law, there seemed to be a strong practice of not intermarrying with the natives that are there. And that's what this story may also be about.
Right. Absolutely. And that's also what all of the, we could say that that's what some of the laws of kashrut are about, right? If I can't have dinner with you, my kid can't marry your kid, right? Because it all comes down to negotiation, right? And it's interesting. Dara, go ahead.
I'm skipping ahead, but I mean, one of the most troubling passages in the Torah is the genocide of the people that you're going to conquer. And the reason given isn't, oh, you need the land, get them out. It's you meant to prevent the intermarrying and intermixing with those people that you're going to conquer. And and then ultimately it's to keep the purity of the faith of one
Right.
God and not to get it all mixed up with idol worship, right? I mean, that's sort of,
Right.
that's the reason.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But it said it's to prevent, otherwise you'll marry their daughters and then who knows what'll happen.
Right. Exactly. You know, next there'll be mixed dancing, as they say. So, but and it's interesting because I think we see a little bit of a progression. So the what Dara is referring to is the genocide, which is a word that we could use to describe what happens in Deuteronomy. And there it's a little bit later in the development, and I think there it reflects a little bit more along the lines of the fear of intermarriage that we would have in more contemporary times, right? Because at that point we have a more well-developed religion, right? Here, it's, yes, in part about religion, but here it's also very tribal and group-oriented with Jacob. In Genesis, we don't really have we don't have much of a religion yet, except we have monotheism, right? And we have sacrifices. But here it's very much about staying within your tribe. You only marry within your tribe. You don't marry outside of your tribe. But we see it happening. You know, we see it here, and then we see it later on in Deuteronomy. So it's continuing. I just think that when and we'll take a look next week at Deuteronomy, there it's a little bit more kind of well developed. The fear of intermarriage is greater from a religious perspective. Here it's more from a tribal perspective. And then we can look at it through the lens of something that is called source criticism. And now source criticism attempts to establish the sources used by the writers or the redactors. So first of all, source criticism assumes that there is a writer of the text, not necessarily God, obviously, right? And in source criticism, it's trying to think, okay, what stories, what sources, what historical sources, what legends from other people were used by the writer of our text or influenced the writer of our text. So this way of approaching the text assumes that A, it was not written by God, and B, it was not written in a vacuum. That whoever wrote our text was influenced by the world in which they lived and the people that they came into contact with, right? So there's a larger context for our story. It fits into something. And so there's one way of looking at it. And if we want to look at this, we could see the sequence of events as troubling. Things seem a little backwards, right? Shechem rapes Dinah and then falls in love with her, right? Shouldn't it be the other way around? Shouldn't he fall in love with her first and then rape her?
It wouldn't be
Right?
a rape then. It wouldn't be a rape if he loved her. Well, rape is the wrong word in that case.
And we'll get to the use of rape later on, because that's interesting in and of itself. But, you know, looking at it one way, we can say that this is a little backwards, right? And this is certainly not the way rapists normally behave. Rapists don't normally fall in love with their victims, right? That's not what rape is about.
Right.
So we can look at it and see the sequence of events is wrong. And why is it wrong? Why should it be the other way around? Maybe it's a case of bad editing, and not that the editor got the order of events wrong, but that the rape was added later on to justify the behavior of the brothers. The editors needed a motive for the murder that the brothers, or the genocide that the brothers will inflict upon the people around them, right? We don't know necessarily why they felt the need to murder the tribe around them, but the editor needed to justify their behavior, right? Even the biblical commentators were not pleased with the behavior of the brothers, of killing everyone, of taking the women and children, of plundering all of their possessions. The biblical commentators were troubled by it as well. And so was the writer of the text in inserting this story. And so the rape was created to create an excuse or create the motive for the brother's behavior, which is an interesting way of looking at it. Now we can also.
Why would you need a reason?
Well, so
I mean, there's people are they get all upset about any kind of thing, and then they use that as an excuse for their misbehavior. And so and by the way, I was thinking also of the daughters of Zelophehad, who said to God, why can't we have land? Because my father didn't have any males. And God said, yes, you women can inherit.
In some ways, though, that, Jane, that the daughters of Zelophehad is the exact opposite of a text of terror. It's a place where women are actually named and heard and prevail. But I think for here, what the text is, what we seem to be sensing is that this mass murder took place, and somewhere along the line, and it may just have been that the brothers didn't like the neighboring tribe, or maybe the tribe had treated them poorly. But somewhere along the line, we lost the motive for this mass murder. And so the biblical editor or biblical writer needed to come up with a reason, a motive for the murder. And so the story of the rape was created, right? So one way of looking at it. Now, ultimately, we can also see it's interesting. What happens is that the brothers Simeon and Levi become the real villains in this story, not so much the rapist. And there we see this as a story of female desire being owned by men, right? Or subjugating female desire to male rule, right? It's an interesting way of looking at the story. Don't forget, the brothers ask, should our sister be treated like a whore, right? And that's kind of the quintessential expression of male dominance. Simeon and Levi, yeah, Mark.
Are you saying the Simeon and Levi were making Dinah not the victim, but the villain?
I don't know that they were making her the victim. They were actually making themselves the victim, or their honor became the victim, right? And this we can see in, honor killings that we see still happening today, when families kill women to preserve, or what they think will preserve, the honor of the family. This sounds a lot like that. The brothers become obsessed with this sense of outraged personal honor, right? This becomes as much about them as it does about Dinah. And it becomes an honor killing. And what happens is, because they make it so much about them, they wind up destroying the opportunity for Dinah to marry Shechem and live a respectful life with him, right? And this and I think this train of thought, it seems to me is in line with Anita Diamond's story of the red tent, because in that story we see Dinah, as once Shechem is killed, she's not happy about that, right? Now basically her avenues are closed off, right? No one's going to marry her because she is, in the eyes of the Torah, damaged goods, right? No one will marry this, or most likely no one's going to marry this woman who's not a virgin. And so she has few options, and she's going to spend the rest of her life dependent on her father or her brothers. And so in this story, when the men make it about themselves, they actually wind up inflicting additional harm on Dina, right? Because now she has fewer options. Eugene.
No, I wanted also to comment what I think about this. First, behavior of Shechem is something that is psychological, as much as I know it, could be, understood. He was approaching her, he liked how she looked, and she committed what she did, and on the way he understood how good is she, and he fell in love. It was just process going on during that, what was happening at the time. And now, for this, what he committed, capital punishment is even almost today, maybe not now in the United States, but almost today. And at that time, definitely that man to be killed, and his family and so on should suffer, but not what those brothers did. And they really didn't care about Dina, because what you just said, I was thinking about that also. They cared about, they just used this rape as some like fig leaves that cover just little part of their body, nothing more than that. And in fact, they wanted to do what they did. And this is why they deceived that requesting circumcision, what is, I would say, not a really plausible procedure. And after that, they killed them anyway, and so on. And this is, in addition to what I said a little earlier, their behavior is absolutely not good, in my opinion. They cared about what they wanted to do, not about anything else, including Dina. And including the family, including God also, because God told them to go to some specific place, not here.
Right. So Eugene was saying that the brothers were not thinking about Dina, but really about themselves and maybe the family honor as the motivation for their behavior.
What I missed, I wanted to say, after what Shechem committed, his offer to marry and so on, it is really to take away his guilt and to restore damage that she made if she marries her. And they disregarded that, in addition to what I said before.
Right. Yes. Right. The marriage would have restored her to a place, or given her a place back in society. This unmarried woman who has been raped has virtually no place in society. So that's
recovered.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Anna.
Oh. Is it me you're calling on?
No. Oh,
okay.
There you go.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
All right. So my question is about the inserting the circumcision basically into the story, because circumcision was sacred. I mean, God had Abraham do this right after meeting the strangers. It's what identified us. To this day, having a bris is such a sacred part of our tradition. To use circumcision as an accessory to murder, why was the need, or why was it included in the story?
Well, that's very interesting. So first of all, I think that there's two things. One, we needed a way to weaken the local residents so they could easily be defeated, right? Because if these adult men had all just been circumcised, they were pretty weak and in pain, and it would be easy to kill them. So that's number one. We needed to weaken them. But number two, I think literarily, I think it's very interesting, because the part of the body used by Shechem in his violent passion will itself become the source of their own punishment.
That's a good point. That's a great point. Yeah.
So I think the writer had got the last laugh with that one.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, Ronnie.
Oh, Lucille, I'm sorry, you were ahead of me.
Oh, Lucille, go ahead.
Okay. The last paragraph of this section is a little troublesome too, where Jacob takes his aim at his sons, but not because of basically of the immoral murders they committed, not because of the daughter that was defiled, but because other tribesmen will notice they're weak and come and overrun them. So his motivation is extremely selfish, ego involved, just as his sons were.
Right. Now, it is, unless we look at it through the lens of a group-oriented tribe, right? And then it's the preservation of the tribe that is the most important thing. And if we look at it through that lens, it's not as reprehensible. So the whole story depends on what lens we look at it through, right? Ronnie?
So that alludes to what I had once read. There is no way on earth that Dinah was going to join the Canaanites. They were the opposite, total opposite of anything we represented or are going to represent. So whereas we will represent monotheism, they believed in cults and the statues and the images and all the fertility gods. There's no way there was going to be a mixture. And another indication where we have to destroy all the inhabitants is Moses. Let me make sure I just found this. Instructed by God on the steppes of Moab. When you cross Jordan into the land of Canaan, dispossess the inhabitants, get rid of all their things and all their beliefs. There's no way that we, the tribe, I never thought of it quite until you just described it, that we, the tribe, could exist and merge with all these other people. It was as opposite as could be.
Right, exactly. And what we see here, one way of looking at this story is as a story about whether we are going to mix with other people or not, right? And at the end of the day, it's so we, as I said earlier, Jacob and Dinah seem to be the ones who want to intermarry. They want to get to know their neighbors, and the brothers are adamantly against it. And this story seems to indicate that the brothers win at the end of the day. So I want to look at it through yet another lens, because there's an endless way of looking at this story. And I want to look at it through the lens of language for a moment. And so some philosophers actually, and linguists say that we see the world in fundamentally different ways as moderns than pre-modern societies. And that this is actually rooted in language, right? And what we do and do not have words for, right? So you can tell something about a society by what it has words for and what it does not have words for. Whether it's true or not, we like to say the Eskimos have dozens of words for snow, right? Because that's so much a part of their lives. I'm not sure if that's the case, but language is not just the mode by which we express ourselves, it's the way we formulate our thoughts to ourselves, right? So language is very important. And the text that we have, even though it defines what happens to Dinah as rape in English, the text does not have a precise word for rape, right? Hebrew does not have a word that means rape and nothing else, right? There are words that we use to describe rape, but they also mean other things in different contexts. So biblical and rabbinic language lacks a term that means exclusively rape. The term that was used was kind of generic for force or degradation. So we understand the word in the context, in the way that it's used. But interestingly enough, and I think a few of you mentioned that, I think Dara, you got to this earlier, rape in the text does not appear to be a crime in and of itself, right? So rape in itself is not a crime according to the rabbinic text, but it might be something else. So let me see if I can find the text I wanted us to look at. Hold on.
When why they say it is not a crime, in my opinion, I think in many people's opinion, it is a crime.
It may be that you think it's a crime, but the text may not think it's a crime, Eugene. So let me just go.
It has to be explained why it is not.
Oh, I'm gonna get there. Hold on. Let me see if I can find it. I had it a minute ago. Let me just see if I can find it. Okay, give me 1 minute. I just have to see where it was. Genesis. It goes back to Deuteronomy. Let's see, Deuteronomy 22. Find it. Sorry, I had it a minute ago. Give me 1 more minute. 22. Okay. All right. So let me see if I can share that with you. Okay, hold on 1 second. Let me
It's very interesting. Just say.
Okay, so now we're gonna take a look at Deuteronomy and see if we can find out what's going on in Deuteronomy that will help us understand whether this was a crime or not. So we're gonna go to Deuteronomy chapter 22, okay? And we're gonna take a look at verse 22, okay? If a man is found lying with another man's wife, both of them, the man and the woman, with whom he lay, shall die. Thus you shall sweep away evil from Israel. And then it goes on. In the case of a virgin who is engaged to a man, if a man comes upon her in town and lies with her, you shall take the two of them out to the gate of that town and stone them to death. The girl because she did not cry for help in the town, and the man because he violated another man's wife. Thus you shall sweep away evil from your midst. But if the man comes upon her, let's see, if the man comes upon her, a engaged girl in the open country, and the man lies with her by force, only the man who lay with her shall die. But you shall do nothing to the girl. The girl did not incur the death penalty, for this case is like the one of party attacking and murdering another. He came upon her in the open, though the engaged girl cried for help, there was no one to save her. Now, that's of an engaged woman. Now, if a man comes upon a virgin who is not engaged, and that's the case that we have here with Dinah. She's a virgin and she's not engaged to anyone. If a man comes upon a virgin who is not engaged and seizes her and lies with her, and they are discovered, the party who lay with her shall pay the girl's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife. Because he has violated her, he can never divorce her. Okay? So we kind of have to jump ahead to Deuteronomy to understand a little bit about what's going on in Genesis. Okay? So what do we have from that?
So Shechem offered, or Hora, whatever his father's name is, did exactly what the Torah describes. He offered
Exactly. Right. So
I'm appalled that a woman would, I guess, doesn't have any other choice in that culture to marry a man who just raped her. Like now she's stuck through no fault of her own. Now she has to stay with this idiot. And, it's amazing to me that, it's so clear that the women's feelings don't count for anything, not a thing.
Just property.
Yes,
right. Exactly. So like I said, the rape is in and of itself not a crime. In Deuteronomy, the rapist is given the death penalty for his crime. But what's the crime? It's not rape. It's adultery.
Property. Yeah.
Well, if it's with a betrothed woman who's engaged, then it's considered adultery. And that's why it becomes a capital offense. Rape isn't a capital offense, but adultery is a capital event. Now, if it's within a woman who's a virgin and unmarried and not engaged, the penalty is 50 pieces of silver paid to the father, right? So in this case, you're right, the brothers should have exacted a fine and consented to the marriage. And so raping a betrothed girl becomes a criminal case with capital punishment, but raping a single girl is a civil case with a monetary fine. Why? And what claim does the father have against a man who has sex with his daughter? The daughter's sexuality is seen as the possession of the father. right? And he must be compensated for the bride price that he would have received if he'd been able to marry her off. And in Deuteronomy, the rapist pays the father what would have been the bride price. And the idea of having the girl marry the rapist was so that the father wouldn't be saddled with supporting the girl forever.
Yeah, well, it makes sense if she's
Yeah,
defiled.
she's well,
Right? The goal was, if you had sons, they were going to stay with you and support you. And if you had daughters, they were going to be married off into other families and you'd have no more responsibility for them. So, so we can look at, so I think my point was with all of this was that there are a number of ways of looking at this text, or really any text. And with text, I think it's all about context, right? Many of the stories that we encounter in the Torah have another meaning in addition to what appears to be the face value of the text. Now, at the same time, I also want to point out that one of the reasons why this is still a text of terror, even if we see this in some sort of larger light, even if we see this as a struggle between tribes, or the desire to assimilate and the desire to not assimilate, but to remain separate. It's also a text of terror because we also see how this, as an important biblical text, influences later thinking. And we can look at this and see a lot of this in terms of the way we think about rape, even today, right? Because
Victor?
the early biblical comment, yeah, Marilyn.
And when the text of terror, did that arrive later on, you said?
Yeah, that's a modern
Okay.
phraseology
Yeah.
by a contemporary Christian feminist theologian. Kind of looked at the Bible, from start to finish, and found all of these different texts. But I think what's important for us to remember, and I don't want to diminish that by framing this in other contexts, is that also we have one of the most important things to remember is that the Bible does influence the way contemporary society has thought about things. So it seems like the text in some way, when it points out that Dinah went out alone to meet other women, the early rabbinic commentators faulted her, almost considered her loose or wanton for her behavior. And that translates into the way that we think of women who are raped, right? Did the way they dress or the way they walk have anything to do with it? So that's another, that's an equally important lens that we have to think about in terms of how the text has impacted the way we think about things even thousands of years later. And the idea that women's sexuality was something to be controlled or possessed by men, and not something that they had any control over themselves. So, looking at it from that contemporary lens, it's very interesting because while many of the biblical scholars have tried to look at this in terms of context and have really marginalized the rape scene, which may be an accurate reading of the text, another reading of the text is that this woman was raped and what happened to her, right, as a result of it, and we don't find out. We know nothing about that. So it's a very, so that in and of itself is troubling. And if we look at it through that lens, yeah, Marilyn.
I'd be curious to know what the Orthodox, would view this now, this text. Don't know.
I think they would, that's a great question. I think they would view it as, I think they would see it as a troubling text. And I think they would maybe see it as a story about intermarriage. They would maybe, I don't know if they would focus more on, I think, the motives of some of the characters rather than larger lessons from the text. And it's also in a portion where there is so much else going on it's very easy to sort of pay very little attention to this story. You know, and marginalize the story as much as we marginalize the rape in the story. We can marginalize the entire story in the context of a larger Torah portion where so much is happening. Eugene.
Now I have a question after my comments. Basically, it is based on my comments. And my opinion about behavior of the brothers, I express it, I think, to many people here and around can have similar opinion. But what do rabbis in the past and maybe closer today say about the behavior, how they estimate it, how bad it is, good or bad, and so on and so on? What do you know about that, please?
So it's very interesting because the early commentators, the classic rabbinic commentators, were very critical of the brothers. They were not happy with the brothers. They felt that the brothers should not have done this. So which is very interesting. Even though, you know, we could say that it was, you know, some people might say it was justified. Most of the biblical commentators felt that the brothers went way over and beyond any reasonable behavior. You know, they kind of sided with Jacob that this was going to be bad for them in one way, but they also felt like it was reckless and wanton behavior, and that the brothers were wrong to do it. Absolutely.
If somebody justified, how did they justify it? That it was response to rape or anything else? Because I expressed my opinion about what was in the paper.
Right. I don't know if I don't know if the biblical commentators, the classic commentators, justified it. It's more that the modern biblical scholars have not justified it, but try to understand it as an important part of the story, to explain some things. My point was that there are a variety of ways of looking at any given text, a variety of lenses that kind of help us understand it and see the text not only for what is happening in that moment, but also for what the text is trying to tell us. What was the motive of the biblical author or redactor, as we call the editor or editorial committee of the Bible back in the day? So what was the motive of the original author, and what's the lens through which we look at it today? And I think we can kind of hold all of those different lenses together at the same time. We don't have to look at any piece of Torah from only one lens. We can look at them all to try to understand something as completely and thoughtfully as possible. So this is a text that we can look at as one where this was maybe a struggle between different interests of a tribal society, but we can also look at it as a troubling text about rape that has influenced to this day how we look, how society thinks about rape, and especially women who are raped, right? So I think all of those help us explain something. It doesn't necessarily make a text easier, but I think it helps us create some context around a text so that it's a little less troubling and maybe a little bit more understandable. And next week, we will take a look at some of the troubling texts from Deuteronomy, where our ancestors are instructed to commit mass murder. Also very difficult, and we'll see what some of the commentators have had to say about that. So thank you all for studying with me today.
What's your email address? Just, it's hard to find it. What's the email address if I want to send it?
My email address is vappell, so it's VAPPELL at TEWNJ.org.
Okay.
Thank
Send
you.
all the fan mail you like.
Toda rabah.
Okay, thank you,
Thanks so
everyone.
much.
Thank you so
I'll see you
much.
next week,
Great.
if not sooner.
Have a good
Great
start.
session.
Happy Hanukkah.
Thank you. Happy Hanukkah. We have 8 great nights of activities at the temple. So be sure to join us for them.
Looks wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.